Hello everyone, and thank you for joining today. My name is Brittany and I want to welcome you all to the ITIL webinar. First, we'll talk about a couple of optimization tools. Then I'll introduce our speaker, Patrick, and he'll take over and give his presentation. We'll then have Gary Ballantyne talk about QuickStart and show some of our ITIL classes that we offer, along with other training options we provide. And we'll also have Q&A for any questions you might have for Patrick or Gary. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to you by Monday, so go ahead and just ask one of your QuickStart account reps, or you can email me at brittany.morin@quickstart.com, and we'll be able to provide this recording. To optimize your experience during this webinar, feel free to ask questions by clicking on the message icon and typing it in at the box at the bottom left. If Patrick sees that he can answer your question without going too off topic, he'll answer it. Otherwise, he'll wait till the end and answer it during Q&A. And if you don't want to see the chat section, go ahead and click the X at the top of the message box, and you can see the presentation in full screen. I'll now hand it over to Patrick, and he'll give his presentation on ITIL. Patrick?
Very well. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Good to have you all here. Everybody can give me just a moment here. I'm going to take control of the screen.
Yep.
And we'll go ahead and actually have it open up my slide deck here. Here we go. I want this one. Nobody wants to see my inbox. Don't think anybody wants that. Come on, it's taking just a little bit of time. I apologize, everybody. All right, here we go. This is our program for you to talk about ITIL. One of the things that we wrestled with was what kind of a conversation to have. I've had the lucky privilege over my career to work with literally a couple hundred different organizations actually trying to do the hard work of IT service management. And so one of the things that I think is often missing from traditional training programs or even traditional types of webinar programs is just a good conversation about how to do this stuff, right? And what are some of the things that organizations have been able to do and do well in a way that have been able to drive meaningful value for their companies, and where we can actually have some proof, where there's actually some demonstrable value there. So just a little tiny bit about the background I bring to this. My background is both in IT management and in business management. So I'm real familiar with the issues from both sides. From a business management perspective, they're trying to run the business, trying to do so in compliance with the rules and policies and laws that they face, and the other business challenges that they face. They're looking for IT to support them. They're looking for the help that we bring to them. As IT managers, as IT organizations, we have tremendous complexities to deal with. We have large arrays of new requirements, lots of services that effectively we want to keep the lights on related to, and so forth. And then a whole bunch of different people talking in our ear about different ways we can do different things. Things we can do for service management, for project management, for software lifecycle development, for operational support, and the like. And so one of the things I spend time looking at is how to bring all this stuff together. How do you take all these different frameworks and models and quality systems, and then how do you help work with organizations to just do this stuff? To take advantage of things that make sense in their organization, and to be able to effectively start getting some real traction and some real practice with all of that. So to that end, this particular program is really about what I call best practices and best practices. Right? Having now worked with all of these best practices frameworks, especially ITIL, for a number of years, there's really reasons to spend energy on this from an organizational perspective. The data on the slide that you're looking at right now comes from a report that was recently replicated by Glenn O'Donnell, and he's actually in the process of publishing an updated version of this from Forrester. But effectively, when they look at the broad number of organizations who claim to be doing ITIL or IT service management implementations, they're asking hard questions about value. Right? Are they seeing a benefit associated with what they're doing? And the feedback that they're getting, that the integrators and the various organizations are providing, is quite compelling. Most organizations are seeing fairly dramatic increases in productivity and quality. Almost 2/3 of them reported explicit alignment in ways that fundamentally improve their organization's business reputation. A plurality of them identified very specific cost savings as well. Okay, one of the more highlighted versions and studies out there is from the Defense Information Systems Agency, and the program lead there, Drew Janig, actually published information demonstrating a live 38-to-1 return on his investment related to his ITSM initiative, which was quite extensive. So there's a reason to do this. Sometimes it's about saving money. A lot of times it's about value and about trying to improve your organization's competitive position. Right? But there's a good reason to really look at ITIL practices in the context of not just doing good process or driving certain kinds of efficiencies, but really a broader win theme, something that's fundamentally driven by your organization. So what do we see in organizations that have had a lot of success here? Right? When people have done this and done this well and come out, with lots of, in some cases, very public communications about what they've done, what have they identified as the specific things that helped them be successful? Well, the first is this basic idea of continual improvement, right? So almost all of our organizations do a lot of the things that are described in things like ITIL best practices. There are fully 26 different defined practices in ITIL. Most organizations haven't formalized most of this stuff, but almost everybody does some of this. Right? And most of our organizations do some of this fairly well. That's why we're all still here. So the bigger question becomes, how efficiently are we doing the things that we do? How effectively are we doing the things we do? What's the level of quality we're delivering for our customers? And how do we get better at all that? Right? Given where we are, how do we save money? How do we improve value? Or both? The business favorite, do more with less, right? So part of what we want to be able to do to look at how we take nice ideas like continual improvement, make them fundamentally part of our culture and very much a capability that we bake into what we do all the time. This really means moving it from kind of a reactive, I do improvements when the boss gets mad, to a proactive, I'm constantly pushing and seeking to improve my processes, to improve my services. All right? And this is largely based on improvements in governance. When you have a set of defined process owners, you have defined services and defined service owners, then you effectively have a throat to choke. And in that context, this gives you a person to focus on driving improvements through and really help organizations get past kind of generic wishing. I hear lots of CIOs talk to me about, well, I just wish everybody would try to improve everything all the time. Well, that's a nice wish, but of course we're all real busy. Everybody's working, doing things that they need to get done. And so ultimately what we end up with instead is a whole lot less. Right? People effectively can't get after these types of continual improvement activities because we're distracted with other kinds of things. Likewise, there's many things we could do, but last I checked, there were only a few of us. Right? And there's only so much time, there's only so much budget available. So we have to aim. We have to be kind of specific about what it is that we really want to try to go improve. So one of the first things I tend to do when I work with organizations trying to implement this stuff is help them focus on real basic stuff. For most organizations that do ITIL and IT service management, it really begins with a look at your service desk and at your incident management process in general. Now, most organizations do this, and most organizations have an incident management process, and it's not exactly rocket science to talk about all this. But really, truly, what we're all trying to do in any ITSM adoption is improve quality and availability of service. Right, to make sure we're delivering the right services and we're doing it at the right level of quality and availability. And there's nothing quite like fewer incidents to get us there. Right? If we really want to get improvements in quality, one of the great ways to do that is to not break it. Right? It's to keep it available, up and running, to be flexible and agile, to be able to make changes to services in a way that dynamically supports the needs of the business and doesn't blow it up at the same time. Right? So one of the things that's very fundamental to organizations that are real successful at this is to be very, very careful about how they run their incident management process to make sure that the quality of the data that they produce is very heavily actionable. Right? In particular, I'm looking at things like, how do we, for example, make sure that incidents are logged in a way that starts the clock at the appropriate time, that when incidents are resolved, that we stop the clock at the appropriate time, that we're properly documenting resolutions and categorizations before we close incidents, and that we're doing the appropriate closed loop with the customer so that the focus on the incident isn't on the technology that's affected, but the users and services that are affected. Having that kind of information in hand is really the basis for almost all of the rest of it, for doing root cause analysis and problem management, for identifying people, process, technology, and culture issues that might drive improvements to overall service availability, for being able to do reliable service reporting. Right? So if we don't have good quality incident data, it's almost impossible to really get any good at the rest of it. So one of the best practices I strongly encourage organizations to think through is the governance of their incident management process, not just first level support, but all of it. And how do we ensure that the quality of data that's coming out of that process is strong and of high quality so that we can leverage and use that effectively for other things that we need to do. So kind of hand in glove with those first two ideas, the idea that we want to win a little and the idea that we want to kind of aim, and perhaps with incident management is one of the first places we're going to look, is that we want to try to emphasize to our teams as part of doing IT service management that this is a cross-functional set of behaviors. Right? So cross-functional behaviors mess up organizations. And one of the reasons is the whole idea behind organizational development and why we have departments and divisions and various types of structures like this is for what the governance people call span of control. Effectively, I want to know who gets to make which decisions. Which decisions do I get to make? Which decisions do I have to escalate? Which decisions may I delegate? Does that make sense? So that's the whole reason for traditional organizational structures. When you start introducing all this cross-functional stuff, cross-functional processes, end-to-end cross-functional services, now it's not so clear. Now I have a problem with trying to understand who's really on the hook for various things. So this means we have to define clear and unambiguous ownership of these things. Clear ownership of the processes, clear ownership of the services, and then within that particular process or particular service, we want to define a RACI matrix, which largely helps us answer things like who's got what, who's responsible for various activities, who's ultimately accountable for the result, who do we need to consult with and engage to get inputs that we're going to need, who needs to get status, updates, information as we work our way through. And if you think about the fundamental problem in most processes, the fundamental problem in most projects, it's he said that, she said that, they said problems, right? So it's largely about collaboration and communications. And so one of the things we want to be able to do as part of establishing good practices is to spend more of our energy thinking about communications mechanisms and interfaces than to spending time thinking about tooling, for example. Right? Lots of organizations kind of go down in the weeds focusing on the tools, and they miss the bigger ideas. Understanding and having good processes, understanding and having clear ownership, and understanding how we're going to manage communications to one another. So a lot of the reasons organizations don't do continual improvement very well is because nobody's got a sufficient level of authority to really make it happen. Right? If there is no clear ownership of a process or of a service, then ultimately nobody's got authority or accountability for making that happen. I may have quality teams that come in who may bring great disciplinary supports, Lean and Six Sigma and Applied, and appreciative inquiry and lots of other techniques. But at the end of the day, if there's nobody accountable for it, there's nobody accountable for it. And there's lots of stuff that all of us actually are accountable for. We're probably going to do that first. So having established ownership of your processes, having clear ownership of actual real end-to-end services, I see as a critical success factor. Most of the customers that I've worked with have really gotten serious traction with this, really get there because they understand the whole end-to-end service thing. And so they actually identify specific people to serve as owners, to look at and drive cross-functional behaviors. For example, to deliver email as opposed to thinking in terms of Exchange or thinking in terms of Outlook or thinking in terms of data or the network. I have to think about the service called email. How do we make sure that we're actually doing the right things together to enable the service to work? So one of the other misconceptions that I often see in working with companies on this is that, understandably they perceive ITIL as a process framework. After all, there are 26 processes in here. But the processes at best are a means. And the real intent here is to shift people's views from technology provisioning in various technical functional teams to end-to-end service delivery. How well do we understand our customers? How well do we understand the outcomes our customers want anyway, what they're going to try to go do? And then given that, what do we need to go do in order to try to make that work, right? I want to try to figure out how we're going to effectively move, put together all the pieces that we're going to need to deliver whole working services for customers. One of the analogies I like to use in some of my classes, in one of my other lives, I serve as a scoutmaster for my son's scout troop. And so when you put a bunch of 10 and 11-year-old boys in a canoe and hand them paddles, almost immediately they all start putting it in the water at once, and they all kind of start spinning the boat around and around and around because there's no order to it. There's no cadence. They haven't figured out that it's a team game yet. All right, and so part of what has to happen in order for organizations to really get traction with this is to understand that eventually this is not about my particular technology family or my particular component, but about how this stuff makes up and composes end-to-end services. All right, so organizations that are really successful at this focus on, for example, establishing configuration management. Right, and having appropriate configuration management systems. Again, configuration management systems are not magic, and they're certainly not going to be a panacea. They're not going to solve every problem we ever have, but they are going to change our view from thinking in terms of particular technology silos to thinking instead in terms of end-to-end service, and to help us better understand impact of certain things, impact of changes, impact of incidents, and ultimately give us much better visibility to be able to improve the quality of service that we offer. Lots of organizations focus on things like CMMI or ISO 15504 for actually driving process capability and maturity. Unfortunately, a lot of the traditional models, really you can score pretty high and actually have a process that doesn't work very well, right? Especially the CMMI approach. Really you can have a process that scores pretty high on a CMMI scale that actually doesn't really work very well. And so part of what we want to have to do is to focus not just on the processes themselves, but on the delivery of service end-to-end. Right? How do the processes underpin and support the services? And then a lot of the work that we do in service management is about creating appropriate visibility. Service catalogs so customers understand what services are available, that in fact our teams know how to do fulfillment when people request those standard services from us, to be able to establish meaningful service level agreements. We'll talk about that some more in a few minutes here. And then to be able to establish appropriate end-to-end service metrics, right? So that people can focus on, for example, end-to-end service availability, service performance, service response time, even service security, for the purpose of trying to figure out where effectively the balancing act is. How much of that are we going to need to be successful? So many organizations now want SLAs. Right, so service level agreements exist for a fairly simple reason. The business now really depends on IT. Right, for most of human history, IT organizations didn't even exist, and businesses didn't need information technology to carry out workflows and do things. Now, virtually every business process in virtually every organization is fundamentally underpinned in some way by IT. And so that really changes the game. So now we have this situation where if I'm a business manager, if I'm managing a set of salespeople or an operations environment or a financial organization, I can effectively not do any of the meaningful work of my job without underpinning IT. So that means a dependency, and of course the business doesn't much care for this, but doesn't really change it. So this raises the flag from their perspective on, what level of assurance do they have from IT organizations, internal or external, that we're going to provision what they need so that they can carry out and do the work that they need. So this has changed the game in thinking about how IT organizations engage with the business, and in turn, how we then have to collaborate with them. How well do we understand their requirements, both functional and what I call warranty requirements? Things like availability and performance and security and like. How do we produce targets against those? How do we, based on those, actually establish certain metrics and measures? And then ultimately, what levels of reporting, reviews, and improvements are we going to drive from that? So you can see the common underlying piece here, again, has to do with services themselves. Now, interestingly, one of the questions that came in asked about tooling. Right, asked about Microsoft's tooling. There are a number of different tool families that support integrated ITSM. We'll talk about those in just a few minutes. But the bigger question that I want you to think through is, do I have the right processes in place? Do I have the right governance in place? And then what you're going to find is almost all of the tool families actually do a real good job of helping to support and underpin the processes if your processes have appropriate levels of maturity. A lot of organizations, unfortunately, they do it the wrong way. They put the tools in first, and then they try to gerrymander the tools to work the way their old processes did, which they didn't like in the first place, which is why they went and got the new tool. And so what you end up doing is you take the tools and you end up turning them into the thing you used to hate anyway. And so you really want to do it the other way. So we'll talk about that in some more detail here in just a few minutes. All right, so let's keep going. So in anticipation of my next slide, the question about tools, real timely here. At one level, you can't do any of this without some tool support. So, people who listen to me talk about this, get the wrong impression, because I do push hard that people should do their processes first and get real clarity on their processes before they start wrestling with tooling. Because in many ways, it's really equivalent to getting your requirements first before you start trying to figure out how you're going to build a solution to something. All right. That said, you can't do ITIL by just implementing a piece of software. Right? And so a lot of the vendors in this space really set the customer up a little bit, because the implication is, all the processes are baked in, quote unquote. Yeah, well, technically that's kind of sort of true, but not if you don't operate it that way. Right? So eventually what you really want to do is establish your set of process flows first. And then what you're going to find is the tools really are going to support you there, especially if you're using things that look like ITIL. Okay? At the same time, it's going to dictate a little bit about how and where you aim certain things, how you use prioritization, how you use categorization, how you manage escalation, how you manage communications, and so forth. And so I want to think about process definitions then. And organizations have been really successful with this. Take the time to think through their policies. Right? So as a simple example, change policy is very important. And one of the most important things to communicate is that change is not an inconvenience. Right? When customers want changes, in many ways, this is an opportunity for IT to be very strategic, to create very meaningful value, and perhaps in certain cases a competitive advantage. So our ability to adapt to change and to be able to successfully integrate changes can be a strategic benefit, not just a nice thing to do, not just, hey, nice IT, we're real efficient and everything, but actually drive real meaningful strategic value to the organization. My process exists to help support the policy objectives. There are certain things I'm allowed to do. There are certain things I'm not allowed to do. There's a structured set of activities I want to engage in to be able to get this stuff consistent and repeatable. Right? And as you work your way through this, eventually it's kind of peeling the onion. So if any of you have ever studied project management, this is effectively called progressive elaboration. Once I have a set of processes, I have a set of activities that support the processes, I have a set of procedures that define the activities, and so forth. And so you can get as granular as you really want with this. Depending upon the size of your organization and the kind of consistency you want, you may want to get very detailed. Working with some very large organizations, they get all the way down to the work instruction kind of clickstream level. Do this, do this, do this. But that gives them extremely consistent practice, extremely consistent and high quality data that they can leverage and use. Right. In general, when organizations take the time to do the requirements right, to get the process properly aligned and defined, then the tooling questions really go away. Right. Regardless of the tool families that you look at, you're going to find that most of the major manufacturers, including BMC and Microsoft and CA and HP and IBM and others, that all of these tools more or less work. Right, that all of the process, that they certainly are familiar with ITIL and with some of the core processes, and you're going to see the connective tissue. So if you take a look at this slide here, effectively what we're looking at is a generic process model. Right, so when you're defining your own processes, organizations need to take the time to move beyond what I call the flowchart view of a process. Right, flowcharts are fine, and they certainly provide us some perspective on what the process is. But there's really a whole lot more that goes into it, and there's a whole lot more that's really important here. So if you look at any particular process architecture, it looks something like this. There's some kind of trigger, something, or some finite number of things that are supposed to kick the process off. Right? From there are certain inputs that you probably want. So if I wanted a request for change to kick off change management process, there's probably a form I'm supposed to fill out that describes who I am, why I want the change, yes, I'm willing to pay for it, stuff like that. Once the process actually is engaged, there's really three buckets of considerations. The enablers, what resources and capabilities do I have to do this? Resources are effectively stuff, hardware, software, people, and money. Right? And I can use this stuff in certain ways, but in and of itself, it's just stuff. Right? It's potential energy, if you want to think about it that way. And then from there, capabilities are how I take stuff and make something useful out of it. I can use organizational structures, I can use process, I can use knowledge, the smarts of my people, if you will, to take the stuff and make something valuable. Right? But in order to run any process, I need the right combination of resources to carry it out, and I need the right capabilities, knowledge, skills, experience, and the like. Okay, at the top you see what's called the process control. This begins with an owner. A specific accountable process owner. Right? If there's no owner, nobody's accountable for the process, which is why you get all the finger pointing, because nobody's accountable, right? It's almost a priori if you think about it that way. Right? The owner is responsible for various documents, policy documents, process documents. They're certainly responsible for setting process objectives and establishing some kind of reporting or feedback mechanism so that they can actually observe whether or not their process is actually performing. Inside the process box, we have that sequence we were just talking about. We have a set of activities. Those set of activities might be defined by some set of procedures. The procedures themselves might have tasks or work instructions that we use against those. We define certain metrics and measures that we want to take, various roles and responsibilities. Effectively here, when we talk about roles in ITIL in general, we're not talking about jobs. We're talking about clusters of responsibilities and authorities, right? Who's going to do which things? And then, of course, we're responsible for improving our process too. So one of the things you do inside the process box is you produce a RACI matrix. I take my roles, I take my activities, and I map them out. Right? Who's responsible for which things? Who's accountable for which things and the like? Okay? All the processes have to deliver some kind of outputs. Those outputs may go to certain customers or users or other types of stakeholders within the process, and those in turn might trigger something else. So the reason I'm showing all this to you is that when I go in and do process assessments with customers, what I discover is it's usually not the flowchart that's an issue. The flowchart itself is usually not really a problem, and we spend time looking at it. We're really kind of wasting our time. Most of the issues associated with processes occur in this context that sits around that. Do we have unclear triggers? Do we lack consistent inputs? Do we not have enough resources to do the work? Do we not have the right capabilities? Are we missing certain skills? Do we have siloing in our organization that are preventing collaboration? Is there no clear owner? Is there no clear objective? Do we not have good metrics, right? So you can see that all this other process context stuff really can get in the way of the process itself. And so when you're defining your process, part of what you're going to do is you're going to dig up some bodies here. You're going to find some messes. And it's going to create some real opportunities for your organization to get better without spending a lot of money, without doing a lot of technology, without implementing large numbers of tools, but very much focused on, how do we actually get better? Well, we could get real consistent about how we start. We could get consistent about how we assess whether we have the resources and capabilities in place to carry out and do the work we're being asked to do. We could get better by defining more clearly our roles and responsibilities so we know who's got what. Because if you think about it in the real world, isn't that almost always it? He said that, she said that, they said, right? Because I thought that they had this and they thought that I had that, and that's really how we get in a lot of trouble. So using this process model will help you look at any process inside your organization and assess its capability. You can use this alongside models like ISO 15504 to really look at and measure your process capability, and then you can use that to help drive improvements as you go. So Bill, you had asked about whether the presentation is going to be available later. There will be, this program is being recorded and will be made available to you. If you reach out to Start Rep, they'll provide a link to you on Monday, I believe, is when they're going to have this available for you. So you can absolutely take a look at that. I can't give you this slide, but it won't take you very long if you pause it. Just go ahead and sketch this down. And this is definitely the model you're going to want to use. All right, let's move ahead a little bit. So one of the things I want to show everybody is just to help you think a little more broadly about not just having a bunch of individualized ITSM processes or ITIL processes, but how it's really supposed to work together to support your organization. Right? So if you look at this picture on the screen here, it really begins on the left with users. Right? You've got users using your server, and for various reasons, they have disruptions. They can't use them. They have an incident of some kind. Right? Maybe it's an access control issue. I have a process called access management, really heavily focused on access rights. Provision them, how do we restrict them, how do we remove them? Our enterprise users might pick up the phone, call our service desk. Our service desk really does two things, I can't and I want. Okay, I want a standard request for standard stuff. So there's a separate process in ITIL called request or request for service request management that really handles those things. Right, and the goal there is really to try to kind of keep those moving, to keep those things done as efficiently and effectively as you can. Right, in the case of incidents, I want to be able to have access to a knowledge base. Right, so you're having this disruption of service. Do we have a previous incident where we have a workaround in hand for what we can do in this case? Are you incident number 50 related to some live problem that we're currently working? Is this a known error in a particular piece of software? In that case, is there a workaround available I can give you to get you up and going now? So incident management as a process focuses on users. Short term, the work the user to do. Users using a service to carry out some kind of workflow. How can I help them put in place perhaps a workaround so they can get back to work, so they can go after and do the things that they need to get done? Problem management in ITIL really focuses on root cause. Right, so if I have an incident or multiple incidents and I don't know why, right, how and where do we spend resources to really dig up the root cause of the incident, whether it's hardware and software, people and process, and then how would we put in place some kind of real fix? Okay, we're also on the hook for managing something called the known error database, effectively providing guidance to the incident teams. Hey, if you run into this, it's a known error in Outlook, do this. Okay. Problem management in turn engages with processes like change management, release and deployment management, and even config for the purpose of driving permanent fixes into production. Right, so if you look at this thing here, and we're trying to do this real quickly because we don't have a lot of time together. Yeah, each one of these boxes here identifies an individual idle process. But the bigger idea here is, do we actually have these processes working collaboratively? You'll notice it's not a nice clean workflow because it's not. You have different activities and different sets of objectives, but there's clearly a delineation and a set of links here. There will be common sets of information that we want to track. We want to track histories of changes based on my configuration items, histories of incidents, link incidents to problems, link problems to errors and eventually to fixes, right? And to be able to keep up with all of this. So to the question that the gentleman asked about tooling, part of the idea is to envision the tooling in the proper way. Tooling doesn't exist as a process engine for one process. Unfortunately, that's the way we often do it, right? But as a practical matter, I'm not really that interested in just a tool for incident management, or just a tool for request fulfillment, or just a tool for a service catalog, or just a tool for TIG. Right? Eventually, if we're going to get where we really want to go, we want to think about the process flows together. There's really 8 processes on the screen here. And eventually, what I want to be able to do is to use an integrated approach to this. Now, this is what the tools in theory are supposed to do. So if you use Microsoft's tools or BMC or ServiceNow or what have you, this is in fact what the tools are supposed to do together. But I have a strong suspicion that no vendors actually walked you through this and showed you how to use your tools, not just in kind of little pieces, but actually as an integrated view. Right? So when you apply tooling to your processes, don't do it one process at a time. Take enough of a step back to look at the big picture model you're trying to support, which is more or less like this, and then ask your question, how will the tool not just help me pick off this little piece of it? How does it help me get to the whole? How does it help me get to the point where I can actually see how all of this stuff works together? And then effectively, how does it help me capture and use information effectively? Right? So if I see an incident on a set of configuration items, let's say I'm starting to have an incident on some application, I'd like to be able to know really, really quickly, did we just make a change to that application? Right? So if I have a common set of that are built out of an integrated toolkit like this, I should be able to quickly correlate, hey, I had an incident with, hey, we put in a patch at 2 o'clock in the morning, and now this morning I'm having incidents. I wonder if there's a problem with the patch. Does that make sense? And so I want to be able to use the information together to be able to support a more reflective model. Eventually, as your organization starts maturing its processes and starts identifying and using certain tooling, then we can really go to town on automating some of this stuff. All right. My son is 18 years old and brings a useful, skeptical nature to a lot of different things. And one of the things he was talking to me about the other day is effectively the tools themselves, really kind of neutral things. They are what they are, and it's kind of how we use them that decides whether they're good for us or bad for us. So what automation allows us to do is to do things more quickly and more efficiently with fewer resources. So that could be good things or not so good things, right? So it's important to take the time to think through what the process flow is first that we really want to use. Then it becomes a whole lot to both apply tooling and apply automation through the tooling in a way that gives us a high level of consistency. As a simple example, I was working with a customer that created a run book for rebooting servers, right? And there's, of course, nothing wrong with this, right? So I'm having an issue. I run my run. I can reboot the server fairly quickly. It allows me to do more quick responses. And that's all fun and games until the denial of service attack came, because somebody got wind of the fact that they had this, and through a little bit of interesting sleight of hand, the attacker actually got in and erased all the logs that would have shown that they were running this thing, and every 6 minutes rebooted a random server. And so they had this, it took them almost 7 days to figure out what the attacker was doing to them. And obviously this created enormous amounts of disruption for this customer. So again, this is a simple example of, yes, the ability to automate the ability to reboot a server is very useful. If I don't carefully manage access to that run, that could be used against me too. All right, so automation can be very, very powerful once we know what to do with it. But otherwise, we don't have 4-year-olds nuclear weapons either. Right, so if we have a real immature process, we're probably going to use automation in ways that might not give us the results that we had in mind. Another of the things a lot of these organizations have in common that have gotten a lot of traction with this is that they're open-minded about all of the guidance that's out there about different frameworks and models and quality systems and development methodologies and the like. There's lots and lots of good ideas. Okay, and there are good ideas about different things too, to be clear. They're not really trying to solve the same problem. So they're really not an either-or question. People ask me all the time, should we focus energies on ITSM and ITIL? Should we focus energies on project management methodologies? That's like asking, which flavor ice cream you want, right? You want them both, of course, because they're different flavors of ice cream, and I like them both. All right, so part of what we want to be able to think about is, there's all this stuff out here to help us think about problems that other organizations and people have wrestled down over the years. Managing services, managing projects, software development lifecycle methodologies, both more traditional methodologies and agile methodologies, assessing maturity and capability of processes and practices, governance models, security frameworks like ISO 27001, Resilia frameworks, NIST, and so forth. There's lots of these things out here. And so, one of the things I strongly encourage organizations to do, and I have seen work well in many of these organizations, is pick one from the list from all of the above and use them consistently. All right, so people ask me about Lean and Six Sigma and Deming and Crosby and Shuran for improvement. They're all good. They're all great. Pick any one of them and use it consistently. All right, but what you can't have is kind of the flavor of the month club where we do Six Sigma over here and Lean over here and Kanban over here, and you end up with a whole mishmash of things that aren't delivering coherence and consistency across your organization. In fact, it often tends to reinforce siloing in ways that you really don't want. Right. That said, ITIL is not a panacea. ITIL is going to really help you think about service management issues. There's lots and lots of other guides that helps get down in the weeds, for example, about how to run sprints, for example, to develop software. All right. And so, something like Scrum are excellent practices for making software and actually creating collaborative teams that can effectively produce and deliver software efficiently. All right, so there's lots and lots of different stuff out there that you should be very open-minded about leveraging a whole bunch of different things because it's not a one-size-fits-all flavor, right? You're going to have very different kinds of capabilities from the different ones. A couple big ideas that tend to show up organization after organization. The first is this concept called managing by exception, which means that most of the time I kind of let my people do what they need to do. And I put management attention on things that actually need to be managed. All right, you could think about this in the context of like the Stephen Covey approach, focusing on the important over the urgent when we can. But effectively, I want to ensure that we're providing our teams the flexibility and freedom to focus and execute successfully, and then establishing clear tolerances so we know when we need to get involved and what kinds of things we need to do. Getting clarity about what information we really need. In general, less is more, right? I would rather focus on the key information that's going to help me make good decisions as opposed to having more reports. I started a job 20 years ago and had been running my organization with effectively 3 reports that contained the information I need. The first quarter, they gave me a 400-page document, in the interest of giving me more information. And of course, what did I do? I tried to weed out of that the stuff that I used to get on my 3 pages of stuff I actually wanted. All right, so more is definitely not better there. I want to focus on the things I want to focus on. Eventually, organizations are going to need to be able to become more agile, to be able to do more changes. And when you look at the ITIL practices, the way that ITIL supports this is through the use of change models, effectively predefined steps that we can reuse again and again and again, and the use of standard changes, effectively stuff that, where the risk is sufficiently low, and I have a nice procedure in place where I'm wasting everybody's time. I just want to pre-approve it and delegate it, to kind of get it out of here. All right. So eventually, by doing more, in order to do more change, you have to be willing to use your process for less, right? To gain efficiencies through reusable models. Processes like configuration management. Again, when you talk to the vendors, they're going to talk to you about all the attributes you can track. You can get 200 attributes of this and that. And nobody cares. You certainly don't want all that data. And in most cases, if you bother to capture that data in your configuration management system, you're going to have to commit to audit all that. And almost all that data is pretty useless. It's an incredible time suck and a big waste of time. So what you want to do instead is focus on, well, the things you actually care about. Right? So, a lot of the work of configuration management is planning. It's not technical. What do I really want to know? What information could I live with would be sufficient so I could make good choices? This is kind of the 80-20 thing, right? And effectively what you're going to find is somewhere between 15 or 20 attributes is going to be plenty enough for what you're actually going to want, and then defer the rest of it. Remember, of course, you could always auto-discover stuff later if you really need to know, but you probably don't. And so less is more, very important part of making sure that we're not cluttering our desks with information that's not really useful. When it comes to managing processes, people ask me about different key performance indicators and metrics. I'm a big advocate for as few as you can possibly handle. If you can't remember them off the top of your head, then they're probably not that important to you, and therefore, why am I spending energy on them? Right? So you want to have key performance indicators that are key, right? That are important enough to you and to your ability to manage that you could actually remember what they are. All right, so I like to teach this in the context of, establishing critical success factors, the 2 or 3 most important things that really have to happen for something to work. And then, how exactly am I going to measure whether those critical success factors are real? Try to keep it simple, right? 2 or 3 is fine. I had a customer in Michigan that had an entire wall of KPIs that they've refreshed every week with like 80 pieces of paper. And of course, what happened? It was a great big project for somebody and a whole bunch of paper and trees that got cut down, and absolutely nobody read any of that because it was completely unintelligible. There was just way too much stuff. All right, we would encourage them to replace those 80 pieces of paper with 5. We got it down to the 5 they really truly wanted, and now all of a sudden everybody was waiting for the new paper to be posted, because now that everybody knew that this was really important and that everybody was actually paying attention. All right, so it had a political layer of value to it. It demonstrated an area of focus, that the organization was really committed to focusing on those things. In general, less is more when you try to do improvement. Right? So managers often ask for 0 to hero type improvements. We're going to do this great big initiative to XYZ, IT transformations, et cetera, et cetera. Most of the time, those don't work very well. Think about the last time you were ever on a successful one of those. It might be never. Right? So instead, we really want to drive the whole idea of continual improvement. Are we willing to win a little as we work our way through each of these things? Certainly encourage you, and the organizations that have been really successful with this, stay focused, commit to win something small, build on it. Use it to build momentum and do it again and again and again. Right? It's amazing how really small improvements add up. Right? So if I'm willing to do really simple improvements, but I'm willing to do them over and over again, in an 18-month period, I might integrate 180 tiny improvements. Okay, but in 180 and tiny improvements make a huge difference in 18 months. For one of my large customers, it meant the difference between a 56% first-time fix rate and an 82% first-time fix rate. They didn't do anything big. They did a whole lot of little things, right? And so 18 months later, they could see that they had made huge progress, but they didn't get there through some gigantic initiative or some gigantic transformative thing. They got there a little bit at a time. In addition to traditional training programs and certification programs, it's very helpful, and one of the things that Quick Start will do for your organization, if you're interested, is do these kind of immersive workshops to really sit down with your teams, look at your processes, look at your tools, and to figure out how and what's working and not working within your organization, and to really help you establish for yourselves what your processes and procedures really need to look like. And then given that, what do you do with your tools? What do you do with automation to get the buy-in and commitment you need? In some cases, it's just creating awareness with your executive teams. Right? What is all this stuff? Why should we as executive management care about this? What would it mean to our organization if we changed our dynamics between our IT organizations and our business management teams? Right. As you continue working through this, you're not going to implement 26 processes. Nobody really should. Right. You're going to pick the ones that are most appropriate to your organizations, to your particular business's need. Take the time to get your processes right, get your procedures in place for the ones that you truly value, and that will improve your consistency and improve your results. Right. And again, one of the things I encourage people to do is to be very pragmatic about this. I'm a big fan of the ISO 15504 standard rather than CMMI for maturity and capability models. And the reason is that it focuses on what I would describe as majoring on the majors. The most important question about any process is it working? Is this delivering what the business needs, yes or no? Right? Because if the answer is no, it doesn't matter if I have pretty documentation or pretty metrics or fancy and expensive tools. It doesn't work. Doesn't work means it doesn't work. Right? If it does work, it doesn't matter if I'm doing it on paper or with an Excel spreadsheet. It shows me what I might want to do next. But if I have a working process, that's a really good place to start. And so, using process capability frameworks like COBIT 5 or ISO 15504 is really useful to keep us focused on what really matters. What really matters at the end of the day is, are we delivering for our customers? Are we giving them the things that they need? Are we doing that in a way that's sufficiently efficient and effective for the organization? And then if not, that provides us a little bit of a specific roadmap too. What should I go do next in order to try to drive improvement against this? Clear process ownership, documentation of the various work products, writing it all down, getting it rolled out across my organization, improving my use of metrics and measures, right? So there's a nice, clean roadmap of next steps that comes with taking an approach like that. All right, well, I appreciate everybody's energy and attention. I'm going to turn it back now to Gary and back to Brittany and have them talk to you a little bit about next steps and a little bit about Quick Start's programs, and obviously I'm here to answer your questions as we go. So everybody, I'll pass it back, and thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate everybody's energy today.
All right, Patrick, thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation, and I just love listening to you and your thoughts and your processes and your beliefs. I've started to share my screen. My name again is Gary Ballantyne. I am an area sales manager for Quick Start. We want to be very respectful of everybody's time, and so I'm going to be very brief here. Tell you a little bit about Quick Start. First of all, we are owned by 360 Training, which is an e-learning company out of Austin, Texas. And Quick Start itself is headquartered in Irvine, California. We have multiple locations up and down the West Coast. And what we really focus on is professional IT training. We have live instructor-led training and are just now stepping into recorded training. Specifically today, and what Patrick was talking to you about, we've done a lot of the different things that Patrick mentioned: immersion training, consulting work, and a lot of ITIL training. We also jump into, obviously, project management or Scrum and security training as well. I'm showing you a screen on our website that talks to you about some of the different offerings we have for ITIL. again, as this was the focus today. Lots of different offerings and classes that we have available to go into the intermediate level as well. A lot of these are delivered by Patrick's team. And so we have these capabilities. We have lots of different promotions that we are delivering on. You have many ways of reaching us and contacting us. If you don't know who your account manager is, you can always call us. We have our phone number at the top of every page on our website. Again, that would be quickstart.com. You can also reach us by simply clicking on Contact Us and giving us your contact info, and we will reach out to you within 24 hours and find out how we can answer any questions you might have. You'll also notice we have multiple project management classes, as was briefly discussed, and have those capabilities for you to attend classes from anywhere with our QS Live training remotely, either from your work, your home, or coming to one of our facilities. All of that being said, are there any questions out there for either myself or Patrick? Uh-oh, it's a quiet group.
That means everything was explained extremely well.
Oh, I don't know if that's what it means. We'll have to see.
I just want to remind all the attendees that this webinar was recorded and it will be available on Monday. Please reach out to one of your account reps, myself, or anybody, info@quickstart.com. If you do not receive the recording and you would like to have it, just please let us know, email us, or even call the number on top of our at the top of our website. And it doesn't look like there are any other questions, so if anybody does have any questions that you think of after the time, again, go ahead and email me, brittany.morin@quickstart.com, and I'll field those questions out to the appropriate person. Patrick, I want to thank you so much. You did an excellent job, and Gary, thank you also for your guys' time and everything that you presented today. That will conclude the webinar, and I just want to thank everyone for joining. Have a good day.
Brittany,
Yes.
before you go, can you put your email address up for everyone and spell it out for everybody so they can see?
Definitely. All right, and I'm sending it through the chat. All right, well, thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you.